Now we are going to start a brand new section of JavaScript which is called promises. Promises are probably the most important topic of JavaScript, if not the important topic of JavaScript. Okay, so it will take some time, a bunch of videos to discuss it, and we will slowly try to understand it. But please pay attention that these promises are basically at the core of JavaScript, so it will be very much helpful if you are confident in them. Okay, so firstly, let's start with what is a promise. A promise is an object which represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation. Okay, a lot of buzzwords. So, first of all, what is asynchronous operation? Let's say you write something, let x is equal to 5 plus 10, right? And then let's say you print x. You're getting 15, right? Did you get any delay? Like, right, this 10 plus 15 was added and instantaneously it was assigned to x, right? So when we are executing the next line is not going, this line is not going to the next line unless I have a proper final value in x, right? So this is called synchronous operation. Synchronous operation need not be directly here, it can be something like this also. So let's say I have a function add, and let's say it has a and b. Okay, and it can return me a sum. Okay, it can return me, let's say, a plus b, or any complicated logic also you can write. But as long as they are normal operations in pure JavaScript, then you will always find that they will be also synchronous. They will also give immediate results, which means that a is not defined. Yeah, sorry, so I have to pass the very data. So 10, 5, 10. Okay, so 5, 10, whatever we pass, these 5 and 10, these values will be passed here, and I'll get the result 15. That function will give me 15 and it will be assigned to this. Now again you see that this line is not going to go ahead to the next line unless I get the answer from this function. And why I'm confident that this function will give me answer immediately? Because I know that this function is synchronous. How do I know that? There are keywords to say that, but if there is nothing mentioned, then by default it is synchronous. Okay, so you understand like that. Later we'll see that there are ways to mark that some function is synchronous or not. Okay, so and secondly, why are we saying that all these things can be synchronous? Because whatever the operations you are doing, so all this JavaScript which is running, it is running where? It is running on our computer, and we know that, yeah, we wait for a few milliseconds or microseconds, and just whatever the computation needs to be done, the CPU will do that and give us the result. So yeah, it will be very much fast, right? And all these operations are synchronous. Now let's come back to something called asynchronous. Some operations are not synchronous, some operations are asynchronous. For example, let's say you are hitting some API. So let's go some to that fake API. So JSON placeholder is the place where you can get some mock APIs for testing. Okay, so for example, this is a simple API. Okay, and what is API? So it gives some data for consumption. It is not directly for user consumption, but in turn it is sort of a backend, right? We will try to create our own backend like this in Express.js later, but for now this is sort of a fake REST API which will give us some data, right? But these sort of data is not of any use directly to the user. Like website is like sort of this, right? Website is something like this. These sort of things are internal. From backend side, these sort of data is coming internally to the front ends part. From backend to front ends it is coming, and the front end is calculating that and then appropriately showing it to the users, right? Raw showing like this does not make sense. Okay, now when this data is coming, who is requesting this data? Obviously the client has to request this data, then only the backend will give, right? Now how does client request this data? That is the first point. Second point is that if client requests, let's say I said you that there is a way to request this, but then if client requests this, then obviously this data from this some API, right? Some this URL is there, okay? This from data from this URL to our, let's say, local website or local computer, or let's say even if your website is hosted somewhere else, then data is coming from somewhere else to somewhere else. So it takes time. It is not a synchronous operation, and that is what we say that these network requests are example of asynchronous operation. Now it means that if I have some sort of asynchronous request, then I cannot directly get the response, whatever the final thing is. What the final thing is, this piece of data, right? The final thing I cannot get directly here, right? But then I will call something, and how do I know that when I have the, because immediately definitely I will not, because let's say 500 milliseconds or 1500 milliseconds it will take to fetch that data from the internet, from some or even if our own backend will also be a server. So going to that server, fetching the data and coming back to the browser, it will take some time, right? So definitely that is not immediate, and that is asynchronous. So so that is the first point. Second point is that how do we know that that data which we wanted, that has arrived? I have fired it, but how do I know that when to run this? I need to use that data, right? How to use that? So the problem is that only, and that's why this sort of syntax will not work for synchronous, for asynchronous requests. Right? For synchronous piece of code, everything is fine. Now we are going into a completely different paradigm, which is asynchronous field. Okay. Now see, in asynchronous, so there is a concept of promise. Now the promise is what? That it is an object. So which means that instead of x, which is the actual data, what happens that that's sort of some objects, that sort of functions which in turn request do that, perform that network request, and we'll soon see how to do that. But when we do that, then they will not return directly data, because obviously data is not available, right? They have to just return some handler, and we have to see that in future we are going to get some data in some form, okay? So that object which is returned, that is called a promise. And what is that promise? Object is sort of a promise that we will notify you. We will notify, which means that that object is going to notify you about the eventual completion or eventual failure of the operation which you are trying to do. So let's say you are trying to get this data from this URL, okay? Then when you trigger the request, then you will get a promise. You will get a promise instead of real data. Right now you will get a promise, and then that promise will notify you that when either it is successful or failure, only two things can be there, right? If it is successful, then it will return with the data and it will notify you, and we will see how it notifies. It will notify you that the data has come. And if it is failure, then also it will notify you that no, the data cannot come because of some error. Some error on server part, some error, we saw many server error or client error codes, right? So any sort of error code with some error information or error message will come, right? These two things will happen. Now let's see how we will go about it. Okay, so this is the first thing, that some asynchronous event is going to, which means that this is some function. Let's say inside this function something has happened, something has triggered. Let's say I want to trigger a network request to this, I want to get the data from this, so that has been triggered inside this function, and now this will take some time, so it cannot give you directly the result. So it gives you a promise. Now promise is what we discussed. Promise is an object which will notify us. But how it will notify us? It notifies us by a mechanism called callbacks. So what, you can attach callbacks to this object, and there is a method of that. and that method is available in on promises. That method is called then. So that promise, whatever you got, what you do is that you do dot then, and after that, as an argument of that dot then, you pass a function. This is a function. This callback is basically a function. Okay, so I am trying to say something like this. So I will not write in detail. I will simply write, let's say, p for promise. So let's say this p, or let's say p1, let's say simply p is equal to promise. This some async function is there. I don't know, like, how we will come back to it. Some async function is there which will return your promise, right? And this can be defined by you, or already given to you by some library. And let's say, right now, let's say you have defined, okay, and this will return you some, we'll see that what is this. So this will be like something, some promise will be returned from here, inside from here some promise is returned, and that promise is now given to you, right? Now the syntax which we discussed, that p dot then, we can do something like this, right? And then after that, what is happening is that in this you can pass some callback. Okay, and what is this callback? This callback is again a function. Okay, so this callback can be something like this: function callback. Okay, and so basically what is happening is that when this thing will be done, then it will call this function. So that is how that is how the semantics is working. Earlier, directly the data was assigned to some variable, like I called the function, I directly got the data, right? Here what I'm saying is that I got a promise. Now I am attaching a function, and promise thing is giving me a promise that when data will come, I will call your function. When data will come, I will call your function. Which function? You give me. Whatever function you give me, I will call that function with data. Okay. So p dot then and this callback. This callback will get the data. And then whatever you want, you can do with the data. So you understood? Right now, you just created this function and gave this function. When this function will be called, then only either it will be logged, or you want to do some other things, you want to render this on the website, whatever you want to do. But when this function will be called, everything you can do inside this function, that is fine, but only when this is called. But when this is called, when this is called, that is decided by the promise. I don't know whether the network request will take 100 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds. I don't know, right? Whenever the data will come, the promise says that I will call this function, whatever function you are providing me, I'll call this function when the data comes. Okay. So that is the first point. Now, now let's take an example of it. So again, this thing, this is another syntax for that only. So promise dot then and then callback. So when somebody is saying you that, yeah, the syntax is p dot then callback, okay, then you can say that I can either do this, or I can, rather than creating a new variable, and then I can directly create a function and I can directly call that, right? So actually it will get slightly complicated like that, but and there will be like lot of nesting, but you understand that essentially it is same thing. When I am directly writing here something like that, then essentially it means this thing. Again, it can be a arrow function also. So for example, it can be something like this. Instead of function, it can be something like sorry, it can be something like this. Okay, again, what is happening? This thing which I am passing is nothing but just I don't want to declare a new variable, and that's why I am inline passing that function, right? I could have very well created a new variable for this function and exactly the same thing. Okay, anyways, we'll come back to that. So this callback will be called with the data when the data arrives. Okay, now what is this function? Some async function. Okay, so we will later see that how to create our own promises. In fact, we can create our own promises, right? But right now we will start from the back. which means that firstly we will assume that somebody has created promise and given us, and how to consume, how to use the promise, firstly we will learn that, and then later we are going to see that how to create our own promise. Okay, so right now we will assume that somebody has already created this function for us, somebody has already created this function for us, and it returns me a promise. Okay, we will create our own later, but let's see right now here. Now what is this function, who has created it? Okay, so here comes there is a function called fetch. So if let's say anywhere you are there, and in browser, let's say you are there, right? Then window dot fetch, you write it, right? Then you see that f means function, it is some function it is there, and window is like the main global variable. You can understand that global variable of the browser, that is called window. Okay, window dot fetch. Now anything which is directly available on window, you can call that directly also. Understand? So you can do window dot fetch also, you can directly do fetch also. If you simply call some variable fetch, then if it is available on window, then it will not give you error that it is a global variable. Okay, so you can understand that fetch is a global variable, fetch is a global variable. Okay, and the syntax is something like this, that now we are not implementing our own, right? Or not, we are not implementing our own. What is happening is that this function which is fetch, or you can write window.fetch, but directly fetch will also work, right? And then in this you provide the URL, right? In this you provide the URL. What URL? Whatever you want to fetch. So let's say for example I want to fetch this thing, so I will provide it here. Okay, or you can create a new string. Okay, so let's say const URL is a new string, and that is fine, and that URL I am providing here, right? Now before we do anything, before we do callback or anything, firstly let's see what is p, is it even working or not. Const p, we will see that it will not work. Why it is not working? It is saying that fetch is not defined. Why it is not defined? Because right now you see that we are running the code in node.js, node, right? But this fetch thing, as I discussed, this is available in browsers, right? There is a way to do it in node also, but we have to install some library. But before we install something, this is already available in every browser directly, right? So firstly we'll try to directly run on browser, and then we will see that how to set up our own thing on this node.js, right? So rather than running this directly like node.js, directly this is script I'm running, right? Instead of that, I am going to run it like a website, which means that something like this. Let's comment everything for now, and let's say I'm printing something, hey there. Okay, and let's see if this thing can be run from the browser, and as you can see that I have a project where I have an index.html. Okay, and in that index.html I have attached script src./index. We earlier discussed this syntax in the beginning of the course, right? That you can attach any JavaScript file in your HTML. Okay, now this thing dot, this is where my everything is there. So right now for testing, I have just printed a console log, that if this console log is working in our browser, then I will start using fetch also. Okay, so firstly let's see this thing is being printed or not. Okay, how do you do that? You go to this folder using terminal or somewhere, and then you do like npm i-g serve, that package you install, right? And then you start this whatever folder you have created with serve dot or serve folder name, whatever, and then it will start as we did earlier, right? So now we will see that this file which is saying hello world, it is available here, right? And let's refresh it, and let's see that whether that thing is, yes, we can clearly see that in console. If you open, right click and inspect, right, and then then you will see console, and there you are seeing, hey there it is running, which means that this code which we are running is now definitely available from the browsers. Okay, so now we will start writing code, And now we will not run from terminal, rather we will like this page we will reload, and then every time this page will reload, then that thing will run. Okay, that code which we are writing here will run. Okay, so now let's start with what we earlier said. So there's a URL, and I passed that URL to some function called fetch. Okay, and since we are running from browser, now there should be no issue. This fetch will be available. It will not give us error. But what is this p? What is this p? Let's print this. So console log p, that is the only thing which we are printing. That is the only thing which we should get here, right? So now you can see clearly that it is saying promise pending. Means it is giving us a promise which is pending. Pending means right now we have not got the result, we have not got the response, right? So that is we will later discuss. There are three states of promise, but the first state is pending. I have not got any data as of now. It is just starting, it has not resolved completely, right? It is just in the initial phase. Okay, now now we discuss second thing, that we can do something like promise dot then, and then we can pass a callback. Okay, so let's try to do that. So p dot then and callback. After some time I will directly start writing these directly here only I will start writing, right? But for now, for clarity, I'm just creating a separate function, and we are writing there, right? Okay, so you can see that let's do one thing. Right here, a dot a something dot dot, and let's write b dot dot. Okay, a dot dot, then this thing is called, and then b dot dot. Okay, when we are providing this callback function, which means that when the data will come, the promise will internally call our callback function and should print something. And if this print is done, then let's write this arrow, solid arrow, to show that this line has printed. Okay, now let's refresh this. You see a couple of observations. So a dot dot is done, b dot dot is done, and then you can see that our thing is called, which means that it has got our data somehow, right? The first thing to observe is that a dot dot is called, and then b dot dot is called, and then later this thing is called, right? If you remember, one of the earlier videos, in set timeout also this sort of things was happening, right? That whatever the current thing is done, and then later it was called. That time it was even like just the next event loop cycle, right? That time it was like less obvious. Here it is more obvious that obviously it should be delayed, right? Because it is going to the internet network somewhere, some website, it is getting data from there, so obviously it should be slow, right? And that's why it is coming later. Okay, it might not be visible here, it is like fast, but definitely it is taking some time. Okay, so that data has come. Now there are lots of complications. I will not, you might say that no, this data is not like this, this is the data which was there, this is something different. Okay, so but we will not go into that. There are some complications here which we will only understand when we understand the further topics. For now, you just assume that our data has come. How to actually extract our this data from this response, that we will see in a bit, right? But right now you just think that yeah, we have got our data, that is fine. And better for simplicity, rather no, don't print this all together, right? Even just simply say that yeah, like data fetched, simple, right? Data fetched. So a b and then data fetched successfully. Okay, so this is what we discussed here. Okay, now one thing which we are saying that yeah, we can run this from browser also, and earlier I said you that we can run it from this node also, right? Now how do we how can we run this from Node.js directly, like directly from here terminal? How we can, because this Node.js will not have this fetch thing, right? So how to do that? But before that, let me show you one thing. You see that there are various phases or states, you can say, of a promise, right? We definitely saw one thing here, that now we can remove this a and b. So just you know that a will be called, b will be called, and then later callback is called, so that clarity is there in your mind now. So now let's simply console log p and then do this thing, right? Not even so let's firstly print this. You can see that the promise is pending and then data is fetched. Not only that, you are writing it before, even if you write it later, then also the same thing will happen. See, promise is pending and then data is fetched. Why? Because doesn't matter how fast your data fetching is, that definitely it is going to be slower than execution of your current code, right? So whatever so what has happened basically here? Here what has happened, that in this line I have attached this callback, that this callback will be running when the data will come, and then I went to the next line and executed everything. Now after that, if more code is there, everything will run continuously, right? Now at this point of time, I can clearly see that the promise, the p which I'm printing, and just what is the type of p? What is the type of p? What do you think? Yeah, it's an object, because we know that there are not many types of data type. There are not many data types. So almost all the things apart from those normal primitive things will be some sort of object, right? Actually, it is a object of promise type, but that is fine. Eventually, it is an object only. Okay, so that is fine. Let's remove this p. But how much time do you think this thing is taking? Like less than 1 second, right? Less than 1 second, or less than 1500 millisecond. So we know that this thing is pending right now, and within a second or something, I am getting my I'm getting my data, right? What happens if I print this uh, promise after I got the data? And how do I do that? I have to delay this. I have to print this after some time, right? So let's for simplicity write a. This is a, right? And again I want to print after some time b. But if I print it directly, then obviously like both are pending. I know that both is same object, right? But I don't want to print it just right now. I want to print it after some time. And we earlier in fact in the last video only we saw how to delay something, set timeout, right? So we can write that, yeah, I will do a delay of, let's say, 1 second, and I think that within 1 second the data should come, right? Within one. And what was the syntax? The syntax was that there is a function, and this function will be called after 1 second. Okay, so let's now print this. Yeah, now you see that the state has changed. Earlier it was pending, but before I could print this, I already know that my data has come, and that's why now it is saying something called fulfilled. It is also called resolved. Resolved or fulfilled means it is successfully whatever the request you are doing, that is successfully completed. Okay, and that is the second state. One is pending, another one is fulfilled or resolved. There is one another state which is called rejected. Let's say some error happened while fetching the data, then the promise will be rejected rather than pending. Okay, will be rejected rather than fulfilled. Okay, so let's see what wrong can go. If nothing wrong can go, then let's intentionally do something wrong. So let's say typecode.com is there, like let's say type code qq.com. Definitely there is no website like this, right? So it should give me an error. Okay, now you can clearly see that this was pending, and now I got some error that this domain name or this cannot resolve this domain name, right? I got the error. But ultimately, when I printed the second time, after 1 second I printed the promise, then you can clearly see that this time the promise is rejected. Okay, so that is what I mean by these are the various states of a promise. Okay. Okay, fine. So now we clearly understand that what are the states of the promise. So let's remove all this. We are just interested in what happens. Obviously we'll get an error right now. Okay, so what we are going to do is that uh, we are going to make the mistake correct again, and now we are getting the data. Yeah, that is fine. That is fine, data is fetched. But how do we do that this in node.js? That is the one final point remaining, right? So let's do that. In order to do that, actually we earlier saw that yeah, so directly it was giving like fetch is not defined, right? So we have to install a library which will inside node.js, which will give us the features which is almost equivalent to fetch, which means that they repay exactly whatever way in which you use fetch in browser. Exactly the same way they are trying to simulate exactly the same behavior, and they exactly say they will return a promise and all the things which you will do with fetch exactly that thing is called something called node fetch. Okay, and if you search node hyphen fetch in Google, then you will get a this thing again where all the packages are there, npm, right? So npm is where all the packages are there, and here you will get this package also, node fetch. Okay, now we have to install this package. We have to install this package locally so that we can use this. Okay. Okay, so we'll install it, but there is one but before we can install any package in our project, we have to make our project compatible with node.js. Right now, right now we have just a folder inside that we have bunch of files, index.html, yeah, index.js. So this is not a project where I can install something, right? How do I install some library here? In order to do that, firstly I have to create this as a package. We will learn in detail in a few sessions that how to deal with npm and how to create this set up this library. But right now I'll just give you a brief outline of that. So what happens is that you can start your terminal in this window. So I am in hello world folder, so you go to that hello world folder, right? And right now you can see that, yeah, all the files is there, right? All the files which is there. So let's see all the files. We saw that in index.html, index.js, which is there, it is available here, right? Now what you do is that you do something like npm init hyphen y. You can remove hyphen y also, but then it will ask you some questions that what is the project name, what is description, all this. Hyphen y will automatically fill some data, and it will not ask much questions to you. Okay, if you run this command npm and node and npm, definitely it is already installed in your system, right? When you do something like this npm init hyphen y, when you run this, then there is a file which will be created here, which is called package.json. you see you see this file package.json is created new. Okay, and what is the contents of this file? You can see the contents of this file is something like this. Yeah, so some version you can change this if you want to, like, instead of 1 comma 0 0 comma 1, whatever, that is fine. You can write some description later, like, that is fine. But that is the main point. The main point is that if this file has come, now our project is compatible with npm. Now we can start installing packages. How do we install packages? See, in the documentation only it will be given. See, it is saying that npm install node fetch. This command if you run, then this thing will be installed. But please don't run this command, because there is a reason for that. See, the reason is that they are saying it clearly here that if you cannot switch to ESM, there are two types of module loading systems. Again, module loading systems we will discuss in a separate video, but this is the latest one, and we will be also using this only, but after some time, because this involves some setup, and this was not already support earlier. It was not supported by node.js. Node.js earlier used something called common.js. right? But right now the standard is ESM, ECMAScript modules, which is the standard of JavaScript. But this is a new specification. This was earlier. Okay, so but nowadays Node also supports this, but we require some setup. We require some setup, and that is somewhat advanced, and that's why we cannot discuss that whole thing right now. We just right now want to just run this as soon as possible, right? So we will try to use CommonJS only. Why? Because we don't need any setup, just directly in Node systems directly. CommonJS is out of the box supported. So right now we will use CommonJS, later we'll convert. Okay, so they're saying that version 3 by default, if you install, then version 3, you see that the latest one, yeah, they are saying 3.2.5. so by default, if you run this command, npm install node fetch, then it will install third version. I don't want third version, because they are saying correctly that if you cannot use ESM, if you want to use CommonJS, then you better install version 2 rather than version 3. So we will run this command. What happens that npm install and then package name, after that add, and then version name number if you write, then it will install version 2 rather than version 3, right? So we will rather run this command. Okay, now you see what will happen. If I run this command and I press enter, then this package node-fetch, this is going to be installed in our folder. That is the entire point of package management system, right? It's like you can have 10 projects, 10 projects like this same. Let's say some project is using node fetch 3, some project is using node fetch 2, right? In fact, earlier some packages which we installed, like npm serve, that also we installed in globally, because we did not start learning about our own packaging. The best way is even serve should be installed locally. Everything should be installed locally, so that whenever you publish anything, you send it to server, anything, it is a complete package. It does not depend on outside variables, right? And that's why everything should be installed locally. And when you install something locally, the entire listing comes here. You see that in this package.json, right now nothing is there. When you run this command, when you will run this command, then two things will happen. One, a new folder called node_modules will be created here. Okay, that folder will have all the softwares, all the packages which you are installing. That is first thing. Second thing, that is the that is not committed in the git history, which means that you can delete that, and if you are sharing code with somebody, you don't share that whole like installed software. But how they are able to figure out that what softwares to run for this project? Whatever softwares you install from here, that will be added to your package.json file, right? And when you share with somebody, you simply share everything other than that node_modules, and when they will run something called npm install, then they will automatically create this node_modules folder. Okay, so right now let's run this command firstly. Okay, so let's run this command. So we are clearly seeing that node_modules, this folder is created. And now you can see that, yeah, node fetch is obviously installed. This is what we wanted to install, but a bunch of other things are also installed. Why? So basically these are dependencies. These are dependencies of node fetch. You understand? So again, you can create your own another package which depends on node fetch. So nobody in the open source world writes everything from scratch. They use other softwares and build on top of that. And again, other people will use those softwares to build on top of that. And you can use node fetch to build on top of that. So that is how it works. That is how open source system works. All the softwares in this ecosystem. So you can see the 3 dependencies, right? And you can see that, yeah, some dependencies they have written. So internally, actually those things will be needed. I don't know, like this is version 3 dependency or version 2 dependencies. This might be the latest version 3 dependency, right? But we have installed version 2. Anyways, just I wanted to show you that whatever you're installing, more than that will be installed. Anyways, you don't have to look at this folder because this is just there. You just ignore it. Okay. But you also see one more thing, that the node fetch is installed here. Node fetch is installed here. So in this, as a dependencies, you have got this node fetch, right? So now even if you delete node modules and share your thing, then other party will know that they need to install node fetch. So when they will do npm install, then this thing there automatically node modules folder will be created, and in that node fetch etc will be automatically installed, because the packagation says that this project needs node fetch. Okay, that is fine. That is one thing. Now we will just hide this. Next thing is that how do we use this node fetch, right? So using this node fetch, there they mentioned this thing, right? There they mentioned this thing, the import fetch from node fetch, right? But but this is ECMAScript module ESM. This is modern syntax, right? We are going to use CommonJS, right? In CommonJS, we use something called require. Okay, require. So we will see that what happens. The syntax is something like this. Firstly let's try to run this. So obviously fetch is not defined, it is saying, right? So it is saying that the fetch is not defined. Now we will define the fetch. Now you see, you can create your separate file. I am just uh, using the same file which was used in here, right? But then later when I will again switch back to browser, then I will have to comment whatever I did, right? If you want not to tamper this file, then you can create your own file. Let's say promise.js, and you can test everything on that file, right? Right now I'm just tampering this file. Later I will comment this. The thing is that const and then fetch is equal to require, and then you use the actually package name which you installed. So node fetch. So this is the syntax. This is syntax. Okay. So what happens that earlier this fetch variable was not there. Now this node fetch will provide us a variable, and that you can name anything, but better to name fetch only, because by default in browser its name is fetch only. But this fetch is now behaving exactly like browser, but now it is available in Node.js ecosystem. And now you can clearly see that when I run Node.js, then you can see the data fetched is successfully coming, like it was coming here in browser. Now it is coming here also. Okay. Okay. So anyways, you can use anyway. If you want to use in browser, then just comment this, because this is not needed, right? And you can directly run it in the browser also, that is fine. But and we will also use browser for some more time, and then later we will also switch back to Node.js. But anyways, you now know that how to run it at both places. So that will be all. There is a pretty long way to go, lots and lots of things to discuss in promises, but yeah, so we will go slowly and learn it. So that will be all for this video. Thanks.